Have you ever noticed how the moment you finally start letting go, something always tries to pull you back in again? Have you ever come across someone who made you feel deeply connected to them, yet at the same time left you feeling confused and uncertain? Someone who looked at you like you truly mattered, but then slowly started to disappear as if you didn't. Stay with this, because by the end of it, the way you understand this kind of connection will completely shift. You won't just feel lighter, you'll finally start to see what has really been going on within you and within them. Because what you are experiencing is not just simple confusion. There is something deeper underneath it. It usually begins in a very quiet and natural way. Everything feels easy in the start. There is a strong pull that you can't really explain. Conversations feel smooth, emotions feel heightened, and for once, you feel genuinely understood. It creates this sense that maybe this is something real, something meaningful. But then, without a clear reason, things begin to change. It is not a sudden break, it is more subtle than that. Their presence starts to fade in small ways that are hard to point out directly. Replies take longer. Their energy feels different. The warmth you felt before slowly turns into distance, and now you are left questioning yourself, trying to figure out what changed. You start replaying everything in your mind, every message, every interaction, every small detail. You look for a mistake, something you might have done, something you might have said, but the answers never really come. The hardest part is that nothing is clearly over. There is no direct rejection, no honest closure, just silence mixed with emotional distance. And that is exactly where your mind gets stuck. Because when something ends clearly, your brain can accept it. It can process the loss and slowly move forward. But when there is no clarity, your mind keeps holding on, searching for meaning where there is none being given. You start asking yourself questions that slowly drain your peace. Did they ever care? Was any of it real? Why does it feel so strong if it means so little to them? Without noticing it, your self-worth starts getting tied to their behavior. When they are close, you feel important. When they pull away, you feel unwanted. This emotional swing is not random. It follows a very human psychological pattern. Unpredictable attention creates attachment. When someone gives you warmth and then withdraws it, your mind starts craving that warmth even more. You don't just start chasing the person, you start chasing the feeling they gave you. That is what makes letting go feel so difficult. It is not about how perfect they are, it is about how inconsistent they are. But there is another side to this that most people don't see clearly. People who lean toward emotional avoidance do not experience closeness the same way. For them, intimacy can feel overwhelming. Not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and struggle to stay steady in it. When things start becoming emotionally real, something inside them reacts with fear. Fear of losing control, fear of dependence, fear of vulnerability. So instead of moving closer, they step back. Not because you are not enough, but because the intensity itself feels like too much for them to hold. And this is where the disconnect happens. From your side, love means going closer. From their side, love can sometimes feel like needing space. So while you move toward connection, they move away from it. This creates a painful cycle. The more you try to close the gap, the more they create distance. The more you invest, the more they pull back. Over time, you begin to lose focus on yourself. Your attention shifts fully to their actions, their moods, their timing. You start measuring your emotional state based on how they respond to you. Deep inside, you may even sense that something feels unstable. But another part of you holds on tightly because the beginning felt so real, so meaningful, so alive. And that is what traps you. You are not really chasing them. You are chasing the version of them that made you feel seen in the beginning. Your mind keeps replaying that first version and quietly convincing you that it can return. But the truth is, not every strong connection is meant to stay easy or stable. Some connections appear in your life to expose your emotional patterns, to show you where you lose yourself, to reveal how much uncertainty you are willing to tolerate in the name of love. They are not always peaceful experiences. They can feel intense, confusing, even painful. But they make one thing very clear. They show you where your boundaries are missing. And the moment you begin to see it for what it is, something inside you starts to change. You stop blaming yourself for their distance. You stop chasing clarity from someone who cannot give it. You stop shrinking just to be kept close. Right now, you may still be inside that confusion, trying to make sense of something that feels deeply real but also unstable. But what you are really dealing with is not just emotion, it is a pattern. A psychological loop that only becomes clear when you finally step back far enough to see it. This is about two different ways of experiencing connection colliding with each other. And if you don't understand this, you end up repeating the same cycle again and again. But once you truly see it, you don't just start understanding them differently, you start understanding yourself differently too. And that's where real change begins. So why is it that no matter how many times you decide to move on, something inside you keeps pulling you back? You tell yourself you are done. You decide to focus on your life. You try to distract your mind. You even create distance, believing this time it will finally end. But just when you start feeling a bit stronger, they show up again. A message, a reaction, a small sign of presence. And suddenly, everything you were rebuilding inside yourself starts to shift again. It feels like a loop you never consciously agreed to, but somehow still find yourself inside. And this is where things become even more confusing, because it no longer feels like a simple emotional choice. It starts to feel like something invisible is keeping the connection alive, something stronger than logic pulling both sides back into the same space. But this is not random. When someone enters your life and leaves behind emotional impact without real closure, your mind doesn't label it as finished. It stays open, like an unfinished story. And the human brain is not comfortable with unfinished stories. It keeps trying to complete them. It replays moments, searches for meaning, and holds on to the possibility of resolution. So instead of letting go, a part of you stays connected even in their absence. Now add inconsistency into that experience. Moments of attention followed by silence. Warmth followed by distance. Presence followed by withdrawal. This creates a very strong psychological effect because the brain begins to associate that person with emotional reward, but in an unpredictable way. And unpredictability is powerful. It doesn't weaken attachment, it strengthens it. It creates anticipation. It creates craving. It trains your mind to wait for the next emotional shift. At that point, you are no longer just remembering them. You are unconsciously waiting for the next moment that feels good again. And that is exactly why, even when you try to step away, something inside you resists it. But there is another layer most people miss. The other person is not completely unaffected either. Even if they appear distant, even if they act like it doesn't matter, the connection still exists within them in their own way. It just expresses differently. When you create space, when your reactions change, when your energy is no longer constantly available in the same way, they notice it too. Not always consciously, but emotionally. And that shift creates discomfort, because the dynamic is no longer the same. They are no longer certain of your constant presence. They are no longer fully in control of the emotional distance. And that uncertainty can pull them back in small ways. A message, a reaction, a moment of return. Not always with clarity, not always with intention, but enough to reopen the connection. And just like that, the cycle restarts. You open up again, you feel hope again. You start believing that maybe this time it will be different. But then, slowly or suddenly, the pattern returns. Distance comes back, silence comes back, confusion comes back, and you are left sitting in the same question. Why does something that feels so strong refuse to become stable? This is where many people begin turning against themselves. They think maybe they are too emotional, maybe they expect too much, maybe they are the problem. But the truth is simpler and harder to accept. This is not about being too much. This is about emotional investment in something that does not offer consistency. And consistency is what creates safety. Without safety, your mind never fully relaxes. It stays alert, it watches, it waits, it analyzes. Even in silence, it stays active, trying to predict what comes next. That is why you can feel drained even when nothing is happening, because internally, something is always happening. Your attention is always engaged with uncertainty. Over time, this starts to shape how you see the situation. Uncertainty begins to feel normal. Emotional intensity begins to feel like meaning. And you start convincing yourself that something this strong must be important, must be real, must be worth it. But intensity is not always love. Sometimes it is just imbalance. Still, even with all of this awareness, the connection doesn't simply disappear. It lingers in thoughts that show up without warning, in memories that feel alive again, in emotions that return on their own. And that is what makes it so difficult to let go. Because your logic says one thing, but your emotional system is still responding to something unfinished. It feels like there is still something unresolved, something that hasn't fully closed. And that feeling creates hope, quiet, persistent hope, that maybe one day things will align. Maybe one day they will understand. Maybe one day it will all finally make sense. But while that hope stays alive, something else is also happening within you. You are becoming more aware. You are starting to notice the pattern. You are beginning to question what you are actually receiving, not just what you are feeling. And this awareness becomes the first real turning point. Because once you clearly see the cycle for what it is, you can't unsee it anymore. You start to understand that this connection is not just something you are feeling emotionally. It is something that is shaping how you behave, how you respond, and even how you see your own value. And that is where the internal shift begins. You are no longer just inside the experience. You are beginning to observe it. You start to step into understanding instead of pure reaction. And that understanding brings you to a very uncomfortable but powerful moment. A moment where you stop automatically reacting. A moment where you pause instead of rushing. A moment where a different question starts forming inside you. Not, why are they like this? But, why am I allowing this to continue? And that single shift changes everything. Because now your focus is no longer trapped in trying to decode them. It turns back toward you. And this is where real transformation starts to take shape. Not in the connection, but in your awareness of yourself within it. And at first, that awareness is not easy. Because you begin to notice what you avoided before. How much effort you were putting in. How often you were adjusting your emotions just to keep things stable. How many times you stayed quiet just to avoid losing them. And slowly, a difficult truth starts to settle in. You weren't just part of the connection, you were carrying it. You were holding something that was never equally held. And that realization doesn't feel empowering in the beginning, it feels heavy, because it removes the illusion that things were balanced. It removes the hope that if you just tried harder, it would finally work. Now you see clearly, and clarity, before it heals, often hurts. This is the point where many people don't break because of love itself, but because of what they finally understand about how much they were giving compared to what they were receiving. You begin to feel tired in a different way. Not tired of loving, but tired of overgiving. Not tired of caring, but tired of caring alone. And from that exhaustion, something begins to shift inside you. Your reactions start changing. You don't rush anymore. You don't over-explain anymore. You don't keep chasing reassurance the same way you used to. And it is not because of anger. It is because of awareness. You can now see the pattern clearly. You can see that giving more did not create stability. It only created imbalance. And for the first time, you start pulling your energy back. Not in a dramatic way, not as a reaction, but as a quiet decision inside you. Of course, part of you is still attached. Part of you still hopes things might shift again. But another part of you, the part that is waking up, starts choosing differently. You start choosing peace over intensity, clarity over confusion, yourself over uncertainty. And that is when everything starts to feel unfamiliar. Because now you are no longer acting from habit. You are acting from self-respect. You are no longer trying to secure their presence. You are protecting your own peace. This change naturally creates distance. Not forced distance, but a shift in energy that changes the entire dynamic. And this is where things begin to respond differently. The attention that was once always available is no longer constant. The emotional access they took for granted becomes limited. The dynamic they were used to starts to change. And that shift creates awareness on their side too. Not always immediately, not always clearly, but they feel it. They notice the space where you used to be more available. They sense the difference in how you respond. They begin to feel the absence of something they didn't value fully before. Because when someone becomes less accessible after being emotionally present for a long time, it creates discomfort. Not because of loss alone, but because of change. The control they were used to starts to fade. And now you are no longer chasing, no longer waiting, no longer proving anything. And that version of you is unfamiliar to them. Because they were used to a version of you that always stayed emotionally reachable. And now that has shifted. This naturally creates reflection. A space opens that didn't exist before. But this is also the point where many people lose themselves again. Because the moment they see even a small sign of return, they fall back into old patterns. They reopen access too quickly. They overgive again. They step back into the same emotional position. And the cycle repeats. But if you stay grounded in what you now understand, something deeper starts to grow inside you. You become more stable within yourself. You are no longer depending on their behavior to feel okay. Your emotional state is no longer controlled by their presence or absence. And that stability changes everything. You stop being impressed by temporary attention, and you stop being satisfied with inconsistency. You are no longer willing to lose yourself for the possibility of something uncertain. And that is real growth. It is not loud, not dramatic, not something you need to prove to anyone. It is quiet, but deep. And once this kind of shift reaches a certain point, there is no real way to go back. Because even if they return, even if they show interest again, even if they try to reconnect, you are not the same person anymore. You don't respond from the same emotional place. You don't feel that same urgency. You don't ignore what you now see clearly. The red flags are no longer invisible. The patterns are no longer confusing. And that clarity changes everything. Not because it gives you power over them, but because it gives you power over yourself. And this is the moment where the entire experience starts to transform. Because now the outcome is no longer controlling you. You are no longer waiting in tension for something to change. You are no longer emotionally dependent on what they do next. You are standing in your own understanding. From here, a different phase begins. A phase where the connection is no longer the center of your world, but simply a reflection of what you are now willing to accept and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. And what happens next is where everything either shifts into something healthier or finally reveals what was never built to last. At this level of awareness, things become surprisingly clear. There is no more overthinking, no more guessing, no more trying to force meaning out of mixed signals. Reality starts speaking for itself. And at this stage, one of two things always happens. Not sometimes, not maybe, always in one form or another. Either they step up or they fade out. There is no real middle ground anymore because you are no longer approaching them from need. You are approaching everything from self-respect. And that changes the entire dynamic. If there is something real beneath the confusion, beneath the inconsistency, then your shift in energy naturally creates a response. Not because you are demanding it, but because the old pattern no longer works. They can no longer rely on your constant emotional availability. They can no longer give the bare minimum and still maintain the same access. They can no longer stay passive while you do all the emotional work. And that creates a kind of pressure within them. Not external pressure, but internal awareness. A moment where they have to face what they previously avoided. Step forward or lose access. And if they are capable of growth, something begins to change. Slowly, maybe imperfectly, but noticeably. They start to reflect. They start to question their own behavior. They start to recognize what they took for granted. And their actions begin to shift. More consistency, more presence, more intention. Not because you chased it, but because you stopped. Because now they understand something important. You are no longer guaranteed. And that realization can awaken something in them. But here is what matters most. Even if they come back differently, you are not the same person who once waited in uncertainty. You don't fall into old patterns. You don't ignore what you've learned. You don't accept half effort dressed up as change. You meet everything from a place of clarity now. And that creates a different kind of connection. one that is no longer built on confusion or emotional highs and lows, but on stability and awareness. If both sides meet there, then something real can finally begin. Not the fantasy from the start, but something grounded, healthier, and more conscious. But if that shift doesn't happen, if they remain the same, if they continue the same distance, the same inconsistency, the same emotional absence, then the second outcome becomes just as clear. You let go. Not from frustration, not from emotional overload, but from understanding. Because now you see it without distortion. You understand that feeling alone is not enough. You understand that potential without action leads nowhere. You understand that waiting for someone to become what they repeatedly show they are not only delays your life, and that understanding frees you. There is no more waiting for change, no more hoping for signs, no more emotional dependence on what they might do someday. You move forward with more clarity, more stability, more self-respect than before. And the most important truth in all of this is simple. In both outcomes, you are no longer losing yourself. If they grow, you meet them as your current self, not your past self. If they don't, you leave as someone who finally chose themselves. Either way, there is no real loss anymore, only evolution. Because what once felt like confusion was never just about them. It was a process that showed you something about yourself. It revealed where you abandon your own needs, where you confuse intensity with love, where you tolerate uncertainty in the name of connection. And once you see that, everything changes. Not just this connection, but every connection after it. Because now you are no longer chasing intensity. You are looking for alignment. You are no longer drawn to emotional chaos. You are drawn to consistency. You are no longer willing to lose yourself to hold on to someone else. You choose yourself first. And that is what changes everything. So if something is truly meant for you, it won't require you to abandon yourself to keep it. It will meet you where you stand in your growth, and it will stay only in the form that respects who you have become.